data, but experts say even that may not accurately capture the situation, warning the real figures are likely even higher.
Please listen.
And the increase cuts across all major categories, including racial minorities, religious groups, the gay and lesbian community. Attacks against people of Asian descent are up to the most ever recorded in a single year. NBC's Ken Dilanian has been digging into this. Also with us, civil rights attorney, former prosecutor, and MSNBC legal analyst Charles Coleman with me here on set. Give us a breakdown of the numbers, Ken, and why do officials think they're probably still underestimating this?
Well, Chris, because the reporting is incomplete. This is actually a revision of a report the FBI put out in December where the data was so bad they said that they couldn't count any increase in hate crimes. Everyone knew that was wrong because it didn't include data from New York and Los Angeles, just for example. So this new report shows a double-digit increase in hate crimes. That's part of a trend really in recent years, and private researchers say it has continued into 2022. About 65% of these crimes that they documented are motivated by race or ethnicity. 55% are assaults. Another 40% are acts of intimidation. And some smaller percentage include rapes and murders. It's all part of a disturbing trend that officials have been seeing for some time. And the Justice Department says they are on top of it. They're trying to prosecute these hate crimes, and they're trying to make the public aware of them, Chris.
Ken Dilanian, thank you so much, doing double duty for us today. We appreciate it. So, Charles, as he just said, you've got this new reporting system that gets us somewhere closer to the true number, but the number as it is now is deeply disturbing. So what do we do about it?
Well, there are a number of things that struck me when I looked at the numbers, and one of them, before I can even get to that, is if you look at the racial breakdown of hate crimes committed in America, anti-Black hate crimes outnumber other races by literally over 1,000%. Look at those numbers.
Yeah, look at that.
They are startling. And so when I look at that, one of the things that jumps out to me is our entire conversation and discourse right now is fueled with a level of vitriol, a level of hate, and a level of disdain and discord for one another in a way that we have to be more mindful of what's actually propelling that forward. And quite frankly, the political discourse is where it's happening. Our media discourse is where it's happening. And we have to be much more direct in calling those things out for what they are. If you look at some of the legislation that's going on in state houses across the country, if you look at the movement to push out actual history, all of this contributes to a misunderstanding, a level of disdain, and a level of hatred toward one another, which is why these numbers are so high.
Okay, let me talk about one particular example. Just last week, a 24-year-old man in Mississippi was sentenced to 42 months in prison. He burned a cross in his front yard. He was trying to get a Black family that had moved into the neighborhood to leave. But hate crimes are notoriously hard to prosecute.
Sure.
At least in this case, they were able to get a conviction. They were able to put this guy into prison, but it doesn't happen that often.
Right.
So I'll go back to, what do we do about it?
We have to look at the way that these laws are written, and we have to have some level of not only transparency and honesty about the conversations we're having around how to construct these laws and making them much more attainable and usable for the public such that they understand we're not going to tolerate this sort of behavior. But there also has to be a level of uniformity that's brought to them on the state level. So you have federal hate crimes which are protected and enforced by the DOJ, but each smaller state and then municipalities and cities have their own hate crimes that may go further than the federal laws or may not go as far. And those have to be brought into alignment as well, because that's going to impact these statistics and how you actually interpret the reporting.
Can it be difficult for this reason? If somebody's burning a cross on their front lawn, I don't think there's a lot of dispute about what was happening there, right? But in other cases, whether the motivation really was racial, anti-LGBTQ, the argument is you can't always know if you can't get into somebody's head and there's not something obvious. So how do you change those laws? Is that too complex a question?
It only becomes complex when we start making excuses. When we start to allow for everything being a part of just opposing viewpoints and different. No, you are having a conversation about blatant anti-Blackness. You are having a conversation about blatant homophobia, blatant transphobia. These things have to be called for what they are so that we do not create false equivalencies. That's where it starts, Chris. It starts at the creation of false equivalencies. policy, which then allows people to push back and say, no, we're not anti-trans, we're just protecting our children. No, we're not anti-black, we're just protecting, the sanctity of people we don't want to know or believe that they've oppressed other people. These things are where the conversations start and ultimately how the policy becomes affected. So until we're able to call those things out directly and speak honestly about this, we're going to continue to see these problems.
Charles Coleman, always great to have you on the program, and loving the glasses. Thank you so much. We're just getting some new information in. Can we take a look again? I'm assuming that the briefing has not started yet, but we are getting some new information about the Russian fighter jet that collided with the U.S. Reaper drone over the Black Sea. It landed in Crimea, we now know. It didn't crash. That was one of the questions we wanted answered. The U.S. assumes that it was damaged in the collision, but doesn't know for sure. And now this briefing is about to get underway. Do we want to take a listen? Let's listen in.
Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, who will provide some brief remarks about the AUKUS optimal pathway announced by President Biden yesterday. This is a trilateral commitments-based phase plan for Australia to acquire conventionally armed nuclear-powered submarines. Please note Dr. Carlin will have time for a few questions afterwards and then must depart. I'd ask that you please limit your questions to AUKUS, given that's her focus here today. And then after a brief pause, I'll stick around to provide some non-AUKUS updates and answer questions as well. So thank you for your assistance on this. Dr. Carlin, over to you, ma'am.
All right, thanks so much. Good afternoon. It's great to see you all. Yesterday, you heard from President Biden, Prime Minister Albanese, and Prime Minister Sunak on the agreement for Australia to acquire a conventionally armed nuclear-powered submarine capability through the Australia, United Kingdom, United States Enhanced Security Partnership, or AUKUS. Yesterday concluded.
All right, we're going to continue to listen, and obviously she's talking about that deal for the submarines, but we are waiting to hear more, and I'm assuming John Kirby is going to come to the podium when she is finished about the Russian fighter jet that collided with the U.S. drone. So we will do that. We will go to that, and we'll listen in when that happens. In the meantime, we're going to take a quick break, be back with more of Chris Jansing Reports.
I want to say something about the hate crime.
QC Sleep.
Christ said, those who are born again, who have made a commitment to Him, that they will be hated, literally hated, for righteous sake. That has always been in existences ever since the beginning of time. Ever since those that made a commitment to God, going all the way back before even Job, of those that upheld more of a righteous lifestyle than an unrighteous lifestyle. The fulfillment of the prophecies, where it talks about that in the last days Satan will rise up in great wrath because he knoweth his time is short, is a validation of that in which what you just got through hearing pertaining to the hate crimes increasing all over the planet. It's not just here. It's not just here in the United States. But it seems like over here we monitor it more because we basically document it, kind of like keeping a scoreboard. And because of it, the proof is in the pudding. But don't think for a second that that same hate crime isn't exploding in other places. And I'm just going to use Mexico for a quick example. You wonder how come so many people is wanting to run out of South America and Mexico because of them having children. It's exactly that. You're seeing people now that is willing to endanger their own lives or their children's lives because they know that if they stay in that atmosphere for very much longer, odds are they're probably going to wind up dead. That's one of the reasons why I feel so sorry, especially for the women and children that are trying to seek some sort of, sorry about that, seek some sort of refuge over here, is that there's so many of them it's turned into a national event. A matter of fact, just as of this weekend, there was one girl that had been in there that they interviewed for 2 weeks. I guess she could speak English. She'd been waiting around for 2 weeks. And all of a sudden they decided that they was going to rush into that particular, whatever they call it, station. And they did. It just so happens that finally the Mexican government got involved, in which basically it's the Mexican government that is at fault towards allowing for all this stuff to go in the way that it has. It's awful. It's awful because the hate, just as the Bible teaches, that in the last days Satan will rise up in great wrath. That's exactly what's going on. Please listen.
There just has been no break, no chance to get ahead of rising waters or try to reopen roadways in California as yet another storm hits. The water has risen so high so fast, it's almost common to see people trapped inside cars. In Monterey County, crews have conducted more than 200 water rescues. NBC's Nyala Charles is standing by in Pajaro, California, where a break in the levee has quadrupled in size since yesterday. I'm also joined by Ray Cancino, Executive Director of Community Bridges, a group that's currently helping 5,500 people hit by flooding. His own family, his wife and 2 babies, now evacuated from their Monterey County home too. So let's start with you, Nyala. What's the situation on the ground at this hour?
Well, here on the street we are at here in Pajaro, the water has receded. There hasn't been rain in the last couple of hours. However, much of the neighborhood still underwater and the problems remain, although the rain seems to have a lull here. The issue is with that levee that was breached on Friday, crews are still working to repair it, Chris. They say it can be days before that happens. And in the meantime, that means the people who live here, about 1,700 residents, we're talking about migrants, people who are low income, most of them farm workers, still haven't been able to get back to their homes. That means they've been without shelter and also a lot of the necessities they have at their homes because they were evacuated under short notice on Friday. And with that, they say many of them left with the clothes on their backs and their children. So that means things like medication, in many cases, even cars left behind. So right now, they're trying to get to the resources that the county and state says it has. There are evacuation centers throughout this region, but the issue is for those who don't have transportation, people I have spoken to, they say they're unable to get to those shelters where there is food, where there is medication, where there are diapers. So that's still a very real situation here. And still, officials don't know when they will be able to return. In the meantime, the county officials say that they are worried that the more rivers will crest and that could lead to more flooding and also more damage to homes. Chris?
Nyala, thank you so much for that. And Ray, I know you understand firsthand the needs that Nyala just talked about, and I want to get to that. But can I ask?
And 99.9% of the people won't have flood insurance. And it's really surreal because we're so used to seeing California on fire and California doing without water. Now, all of a sudden, they're drowning. It's almost like an surreal scene to the point it's almost unbelievable.
We basically packed our bags and decided in the morning to get out of town because we were afraid of today's storm. I'm glad that
you have a place to stay. Everybody's okay.
We're lucky enough to have family in the region, and we're all huddled up, and we have enough room. But not a lot of people are as lucky as we are. And I'm seeing that firsthand. I'm seeing families, children, seniors sleeping on cots, difficulty getting their medication, access to their dialysis. All those things are real. But we're lucky to have a paratransit company that is able to transport people to those locations. And so if Nyala, you're out there, let them know that we're fine. We'll take them to those locations, and we're lucky to have that within our organization.
Well, thank you for that message. I know Community Bridges is used to helping struggling families, single parents, children, but this devastation is just so widespread. Where do you even begin?
We just say grab a shovel and start digging in the right direction. We basically deployed a bunch of volunteers. We had staff volunteer on Saturday as well as Sunday. We had over 12 staff members at different locations. I mean, my team of case managers were assessing people, 4 of them for basically 8 hours and got through over 150 different families and their stories. It's been intense to not only hear about their needs, but also to start thinking about the resources they'll need. A lot of these folks are low-income farm workers. They're not going to be eligible for FEMA. They're not going to be eligible for unemployment through disaster relief opportunities like traditional disasters look like. We're going to need state intervention, and I know that our local electeds, especially Supervisor Luis Alejo, has been advocating for that. We're advocating for that, and we're trying to get communications to our local elected officials. The action is needed because a lot of these farm workers are not going to have any other resource. And we are doing that with philanthropy as best as we can, but both community foundations are stretched and are asking their donors for support. And people across the nation, could reach out to community foundations in Monterey or Santa Cruz County. And we're going to get those dollars into people's hands because every family, every senior needs it in this community. We have a whole town underwater. I'm glad the repairs happened this morning, and we're seeing some of the Pajaro River recede. But we also have other flash warnings coming down the line in our mountains. And so we're actively engaged in this situation now. We have Salinas River later on today, potentially pressing. And so we're actively engaged in monitoring the situation.
So let me give you a chance to be specific about that. If people are watching this right and they want to help, what can they do?
They can definitely donate directly to Community Foundation of Santa Cruz County or Community Foundation Monterey County, or as well as our organization that's on the ground providing the services at communitybridges.donate. And of course, we're only one organization. We have partner agencies like Second Harvest, like Pajaro Unified School District. We have a lot of different partners on the ground. We're helping coordinate with Catholic Charities in Monterey. It's not just one organization, it's a lot of organizations, and we're going to be transparent and share the wealth because we know the need is there and a lot of people are stepping up.
Ray Cancino, thanks to you and all the folks at Community Bridges for the work you do. And Iowa Charles, thanks to you as well. The gender pay gap barely closed at all in the past 2 decades, but now, today, Equal Pay Day.
I want to say something about what they're facing down there in California, other than it being surreal. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I heard where this last system that's coming through there, up there in the Tahoe Sierra mountain range, around 8,000 feet, they're going to get another 2 foot, but above that, they're saying they're going to get another 4 to 6 foot. They already have something like 15 feet of snow on the ground. And it's become so dangerous up there because people can't get to people. They're using heavy equipment, basically tearing up the road just to be able to get in there to people to be able to save their lives. And of course, once they get there, they don't know if they're going to be alive or not, because in some incidences, the snow is so heavy that it causes the roof to give in. Whenever I see what's going on out there like that, especially with all the moisture that they have received, basically since January, I think they've got hit by about 14 or 15 major deluges out there. In which, don't get me wrong, they needed the water to fill up all their reservoirs. They needed the water to fill up Lake Mead. They needed the water to fill up other areas, but they didn't need it all at once. But whenever you get to looking at what happened up in Kentucky, up around Hazel, Kentucky, that basically devastated like 5 counties. Whenever you get to looking at what happened in Waverly, whenever you get to looking at what's happened in Texas, Louisiana being flooded, Jackson, Mississippi being flooded, and other parts being flooded, water becoming contaminated. I mean, there's all kinds of issues that's in play whenever something like that's occurring, whether or not it be the snow the water, of too much water, from A to Z. I mean, just like them having to bring big bulldozers, heavy equipment just to be able to move snow around. First of all, that requires labor, that requires machinery, that requires fuel, that requires time. And then the damage that's going to be done afterwards is going to have to be gone back and be repaired. In addition to all the property damage that's going to happen, in addition to all the lives that's going to be taken. Whenever you go into California, it's a beautiful, beautiful state, but it's so hilly and so up and down and up and down. And I guess that's one of the things that attracts so many people out there. And, you know, I'm pretty sure that the ones that lives up there on the very top ridge up there on Tahoe, on the Sierra Mountain Ridge, I'm pretty sure those are probably some of the most successful people in one form or fashion from A to Z in one way or another towards how that they have attained their money, because most people that live up there has to have a large amount of money. It's not a poor area to live in. I mean, the average real estate over in Aspen, Colorado usually starts at about $18 million. If you can find a piece of ground with a home on it for any less than $18 million in Aspen, Colorado, you've done really, really well. Just to give you some sort of an idea about the market range out there. It's just unbelievable. And to think that the event that happened in Kentucky, the event that happened in Tennessee, and all the other events that's happening right now, or all the other events, let me get this right, all the other events that's happened in Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and parts of Alabama, to think that if you combine those all together at one time, you're going to probably exceed the damages that's going to occur out in California right now because of either all the rain or all the runoff of the rain or because of all the melting of the snow. It's just a matter of time before the weather's going to change out there. And whenever it changes, it'll go from daylight to dark. Even up in those mountain ranges, they'll start having temperatures before long that will be in the 60s and the lows in the low 40s. And of course, whenever you have that on top of rain, you're going to have massive amounts of water that's going to come down through all those little canyons and all them little rivers and stuff. That's going to, it's going to fill up their tributaries, but it's also going to cause massive erosion, displacements pertaining to digging out hunks of mountainsides that in and of itself could cause mudslides. I mean, it's just endless. It's absolutely endless in what's happening out there in California right now. And I can't even begin to fathom how not just severe, but how great that it is of the masses amounts of what they're going through, because it's basically from other than the very, very southern tip of California, and I think that they got flooded a couple weeks ago. So what's happening out there is very, very odd and unusual. It's extremely odd in seeing them go from one dilemma into another. These are all the signs that the Bible talks about that will occur in the last days pertaining to the sorrows. Great sorrows, humongous, intense sorrows will fall upon to the land, because it talks about woe be unto the inhabitants whenever these things start to occur. Once more, Satan is coming down, not just in the form of the hate, where it was talking about a while ago pertaining to the hate violence. I've experienced that myself right here where I live in Northwest Tennessee, but it's all the above pertaining to the mass shootings, to irregularities of the weather patterns. Please listen.
Was not. I'm not going to get into the particular mission profile of this aircraft. It was conducting an ISR mission. In terms of the specifics, David, I'm not going to, at this point, be able to get more specific other than the Black Sea region in international airspace, well clear of any type of, it was international airspace. And I'm sorry, the other part of your question?
The video.
Yes, so we are going through the declassification process now, and we'll keep you updated on that front in terms of imagery associated with this incident. Travis. I'm laser focused on your question.
That is just a very quick one. You haven't said Reaper, but he said Reaper. Is it accurate to say it's MQ-9 Reaper?
I'm just going to stick with MQ-9. Yep, thanks. Joe.
Hi, thanks so much, Pat. An MQ-9 potentially contains some sensitive technology. Is the U.S. military undertaking any effort to recover the MQ-9? Is it in the waters of the Black Sea? Has Russia recovered it? Is there a U.S. naval asset in the region that could undertake that recovery? Thanks.
Yeah. So again, I'm not going to get into the specifics of what's on this particular aircraft, other than again, it's an ISR platform. Because of the damage, we were in a position to have to essentially crash it into the Black Sea. To my knowledge, at this point in time, the Russians have not recovered that aircraft. But again, in terms of our recovery efforts, don't have any updates to provide right now. I'd refer you to Navier in terms of what assets they may have in that region. Thank you. Janie?
Thank you, General. Regarding the North Korea's submarine launch strategic cruise missiles recently, North Korea has announced that it is possible to mount a nuclear warhead on a strategic cruise missiles. What is the readiness of the United States against escalate provocations such as the nuclear provocation by the North Korea?
Let me just make sure I understand. What's the readiness of the U.S.?
So let me bring in NBC News national security and global affairs reporter Dan DeLuce, because they've gone on to another topic here. The headline that we knew, Dan, going into this was that there had been this collision, and we reported just before this started that the Russian aircraft did not crash. But what more have we learned now?
Well, you heard the Pentagon press secretary really repeating a lot of what the European command had said and warning that this was unsafe, unprofessional conduct, and that it ran the risk of creating kind of a miscalculation or unintended crisis. He said that because the propeller was damaged when the Russian jet collided with the drone, with the MQ-9, that then the U.S. had to basically crash land it or crash it into the Black Sea, is how he called it. But he did not give any update on the recovery efforts, so it's unclear whether the U.S. will be able to get to it before the Russians. And it's likely, as my colleague Courtney Kube has been reporting, that the Russians might get there first, because it takes time to send U.S. ships through the Bosphorus Strait and to get permission from Turkey to move through the Black Sea.
And because we only have 30 seconds left, I want to ask you what an MQ-9 is and what it would normally be doing there.
He said these were routine flights. So this is a drone, a successor to the earlier Predator drones that maybe you've seen in the movies. The MQ-9 is used.
People don't have no idea towards how much activity goes on in commercializing these protected fields, these areas. In how crucial that it is towards not overstepping your boundaries and getting into an area that you're not supposed to be in. And as they was talking this morning about the same thing, that it was just a matter of time before this was going to occur because of the recklessness that the Russian pilots have been performing. I mean, this goes on towards close scrapes all the time. Been going on now for quite some times. And I don't know if they're just double daring by stepping over the boundaries of where they should, or if they're just crazy. Don't know which. Maybe you got people out there that's purposely trying to start a third world war. That's always a possibility too. You know, it's kind of like the people that's in control of the big bombs, the nuclear bombs. Who's to say that somebody out of their freaking mind is taken upon of themselves? Of course, it would take two. The way I understand it, it takes at least two people to activate one of them nuclear warheads. But who's to say that somebody wouldn't sit down and talk about it and discuss about it, and then the next thing you know, here would come an attack, and we wouldn't know if it was a lunatic attack or if it was a direct attack. We would just know that it would be an attack. These are one of the elements that I've continued to talk about again and again and again, pertaining to the snowball effect or the domino effect, to the degree that if one domino ever falls, the next thing you know, all of them will fall. I think there was a movie that came out a few years ago called War Games, where they set up the machine towards playing tic-tac-toe, and finally there towards the last, the machine almost burned itself up, in understanding that there was no common denominator towards being the winner. And there towards the last, whenever the machine shut down and rebooted itself back up, it asked the question, do you want to play a game of chess rather than tic-tac-toe? So I know it sounds halfway Hollywood sense type entertaining, but the fact of the matter is there will not be no winners with a nuclear war. And our professional people know this. And to sit back and watch how this is unfolding on a day-to-day level, just like the drone being hit by a Russian plane, is another indication, a strong indication, that it's just a matter of time before something major is going to end up occurring. And I hope to God that our people and their people is smart enough to identify that it was either a sabotage, resentment, vindictive deal, or it was some lunatic that was basically just out of his mind that wanted to basically start World War III. And you have to look at things logically with Kim Jong over there in North Korea. He's been itching for quite some times towards building all these nuclear warheads. And it's really psychological warfare as of right now. But what if he was to send out a missile that had a warhead? That was one of the questions that one of the media people was asking the general or whoever it was the question, and they diverted away from that answer. I don't know if they just didn't think it was important enough to put on there, towards whether or not we can identify whether or not it is an active warhead that is being launched. I don't know. I know what the movies say. The movie says that we can, but in actuality, I don't know. I think that they can. I believe that they can. But once more, there's always that possibility that one could slip through the cracks. There's always that possibility that somebody could get a sucker punch in. You got to keep all them things in alignment, in proper alignment, and understanding that right now, I've never seen tension rise on the level that it is right now, other than what occurred maybe possibly with the Cuban crisis with JFK, with Mr. Kennedy. I wasn't old enough at the time to realize the the gravity of all that. I just know different programs that I've listened to and watched, and what's been said in regards towards that. We've had other close scrapes pertaining to nuclear silos. We had a nuclear disaster ourselves up towards New York City. I mean, whenever you're talking about tension being as high as it is right now, you can literally cut it with a knife. You can literally, physically, in some of these places, cut it with a knife. And it's all in relations to hate, and it's all in relations to what Christ said that would occur in the last days, towards Satan coming down and seeking vengeance upon the lives of the innocent. You can call it anti-Semitism. You can call it bulliness. You can call it just people out of their freaking minds because they've done too many drugs or they need to be on drugs. But the bottom line, this is what we're seeing right now unfolding. And it ain't just unfolding in one area. It's unfolding in multiple areas right now, from the banking institutions, realigning, possibly going under, towards all the fentanyl coming over here to America, towards all the people that's busting into America illegally, pertaining to your illegal immigrants, pertaining to all the gun violence, pertaining to all the other type of violence that's basically exceeding. And like they told you a while ago, the statistics of hate crimes, in actuality, the statistics that they gave us was probably not even close to being accurate, because there's so much of it going on right now. And whenever I come back here in 2014, I knew, and David did too, my younger brother, that we was basically under siege. We was basically being haunted, taunted, being trying to be rooted out from this area, even though we got deep, deep roots that goes all the way back to the early 1800s of whenever my people originally first come over the North Carolina mountains and come over here. I'm thinking somewhere around the era of Davy Crockett, somewhere around the era of the Reelfoot Lake earthquake is whenever some of my people first originated over here on the Jackson side. I can't validate that on the Davis side, and I can't validate that on the James's side, with us being connected with the Jesse James, Frank James family in the family tree. But I can say that in the early 1800s, we already had an established colony that was being a settlement right here in this area. And that's, to me, that means that I got deep roots here. It ain't like that I just, blowed in here yesterday off of a boat somewhere and I'm from another country. That was one of the problems pertaining to, and I don't mean to be opening up a can of worms here or getting all beat. That was one of the problems with prior President Obama, is that according to our rule book, you had to be established of your parents being here for at least a generation before they had children, before those children could even apply towards becoming president. And I guess to this day, they're still in debate about whether or not Mr. Obama was born either in Kenya or on the way to Hawaii or vice versa, somewhere being transported in between. But you got to go back to the originality of what that law was put there for, because his parents was not here for a whole generation towards having Obama. That's one of the reasons why that I think so many people foresee that presidency towards it being an illegitimate presidency whenever Obama was president, is because of his parents. I don't know nothing about the birth certificate. I know to this day there's still people that argue and to tell you that Obama was never truly an American. I don't know that. I can't validate that one way or the other, because I've seen stuff on TV that went just as far one way as it did the other. Once more, we're giving out too many signals. Once more, we're seeing the hate level rise. Once more, we're seeing tension rise. Once more, every time that there's a bad episode, it doesn't matter if it's a fire, doesn't matter if it's a flood, doesn't matter if it's an earthquake, doesn't matter if it's an outbreak of tornadoes, it doesn't matter if it's a war, it doesn't matter if it's because of idiots raising up the fuel prices. Every time these things occur, it's like walking into a game of scramble, and all of a sudden you scramble everything on the table towards going to pull up that one chip to see what it is. I think it's called scramble, maybe called something else. But everything gets scrambled up, and it's hard for the old used to be prior COVID to get back in line the way things used to be. And I don't think that they'll ever go back to the way that they used to be, personally. And to be quite honest with you, I don't think that they need to go back to the way that it used to be because of all the wickedness and all the ungodliness that was being openly exemplified here in the United States. As Billy Graham said in the early 90s, that if God didn't hurry up and come back and judge America, that he was going to have to apologize to Sodom and Gomorrah. We're under judgment. I keep telling people that God has lifted his hand off of this planet in regards towards protecting us, and the reason why is because too many people was biting the hand that was feeding the people. It become unbalanced, and once it become unbalanced, no, God is not actually attacking us right now, but what he is allowing, and you got to look at it from this perspective, he's allowing for these evil demonic entities that has these supernatural abilities to basically bring havoc to society. And if we're not smart enough to identify that and to look at that in the right frame of mind, I'm sorry, but things is just going to tragically get worse and worse and worse until it does finally just turn into nothing but a major cesspool, not only here in America, but throughout the planet. And that's whenever God will come back in flaming fire, just as the Bible talks about, the King James. He'll come back catching everything on fire, burning it down to the ground. While he's burning it down to the ground, he'll resurrect those that's already died, that's in the graves, that is worthy to be arisen in the first resurrection, and possibly those that are left here during that time, that if you're fortunate enough, regardless whether you're on top of a house or you're in a field, it says to pray that you're worthy to escape these things. And if you're in that house, do not, if you're on that housetop, according to the way that I understand the scriptures, do not come down. If you're in a field, do not go back to take up thy cloak and to pray immediately that you're worthy to escape what's fixing to happen. Because if you think that the things that are occurring right now on a supernatural level, regardless whether it be too much rain, not enough rain, hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, volcanoes, and etc., if you think those things are horrifying, in which they are, they really are. I mean, I was one of the first ones that rolled up my sleeves and went down to Tennessee. I went from Tennessee that went down to places down in Mississippi that worked the Katrina damage. It stayed down there for almost a year listening to testimony after testimony after testimony. So I know the horrors that goes along with these type of catastrophics. But if you think that those catastrophics are bad, multiply that times 1,000,000. Whenever God gets tired of this and he comes back in flaming fire, taking vengeance upon them who know not him and upon them who obey not the gospel. That will be whenever the planet itself will be thrown off in the great tribulation. And it talks about this again and again and again in the first 4 chapters of Revelations, for the hour of temptation. He's talking to us, the true born-again believers. He's talking to us there by saying, I will keep thee or prevent thee on the hour of temptation that shall fall upon all the world to try them that dwell here upon to the planet. In other words, this is going to be a global, international event that even the strongest of the strong of countries will not be able to prevent or stop. As of right now, every time a smaller event occurs, and they're not small events. The event that's happening right now out in California is not a small event. The event that's been happening in California pertaining to the fires and all the heat and the drought has not been a small event, especially if you've been up there and you was entangled in some of those horrific horrors that happened. But every time that there is a small event, it dwindles up onto the resources. It strains the resources. It dampens people's emotions. It works on people's psychic, pertaining to their psychiatric emotions. Some people can't handle it. They just go completely off the deep end. Some people was already close to the deep end because they'd already done pushed themselves off to the edge, maybe because of drugs, maybe because of other surrounding circumstances. But we are living just exactly like the Bible talks about in perilous times. And if we're not smart enough to identify that and to pull together in trying to restrain that or stop it from intensifying, it's only going to intensify even greater. Please listen.
Of what actually happened over the Black Sea today. So on the U.S. side, they're saying that there were 2 Russian fighter jets. They were operating in a very dangerous, unprofessional, unsafe manner around this U.S. MQ-9 drone.
But they do it all the
The
time.
U.S. says in international airspace over international waters. The Russian jets were doing things like flying really close, flying right in front of it, and even dropping jet fuel on top of the MQ-9. And at one point, one of those Su-27 Russian jets got so close that it actually collided. The wing of it collided with the propeller of that U.S. drone. The drone was damaged. The U.S. chose to down it in the sea, in the Black Sea there. We know, according to 2 defense officials, that they were able to wipe the software, so that if anyone, like the Russians, were able to get their hands on it, it shouldn't have any information on it that they could exploit for any reason. But the Russian side is very different. They're saying that this MQ-9 was operating and it sort of lost power, it lost altitude, and it crashed, and there was no actual collision. So what we are hoping is that we'll get some sort of visual confirmation that will give us an idea of which side's version of events is more related to the truth here, Katie. We don't know a couple of other things still, though. Number one, the Pentagon is still declining to say whether the MQ-9 was armed at the time, saying instead it was just on a routine surveillance mission. It doesn't seem that either side employed what's known as the deconfliction line. It's a phone line that the 2 militaries have that is intended to keep any kind of a conflict occurring, or to keep any of their airspace from their aircraft from going in the same airspace and having a collision like this. We don't yet know if that actually occurred. We do now know that the State Department has summoned Russia's top diplomat here in D.C. to discuss this, and we know that Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Mark Milley, does intend to reach out to his Russian counterpart to discuss this at some point, Katie.
What's the level of concern? How high is the level of concern within the Pentagon right now about this leading to something a little worse, something a little more confrontational that could drag us into a direct conflict with Russia?
Right now, this seems to really be in the diplomatic space, Katie. It doesn't seem that this is moving into any kind of a military confrontation. So all of the people I'm talking to here in the Pentagon are saying that this is a case of ineptitude, severe ineptitude in the case of one defense official I spoke with, as opposed to this being some sort of an intentional or malicious incident that occurred here. So in other words, it doesn't seem that the Russian pilots were attempting to take out this U.S. drone. I mean, just on the face of it, that would make sense. It wouldn't really make sense to use a manned aircraft to take out an unmanned aircraft to collide it.
What it is, it's spite. You have the Air Force and the military over there in Russia that realizes that that we're playing our part towards our responsibilities with Ukraine, just as we promised them that we would, beginning in 2014. And it's pissing them off. It's upsetting them. So you're having idiots now that is purposely doing things that basically are out of spite. It's a form of vindictiveness. They're trying to play this game of Russian roulette. And the Russians are the ones that created Russian roulette.
Western resolve in Ukraine, increased assistance causes, the threat of future escalation. And in this case, look how the U.S. responded, quite soberly, certainly keeping it in diplomatic channels. And the most important part of this is that our ISR flights, this is intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance flights in international territory, will continue. That has already been put forth by the Pentagon. And so, these are one of these incidents that do happen. It happens with the Iranians, the Chinese, and of course now the Russians. I think how the U.S. responded was appropriate, and time will tell based on intelligence community collection on what really, was the Russians' intent here.
Let me ask you about Ron DeSantis, which we started this segment with, and this is this idea that he says this is a regional conflict. It's not a high U.S. priority. It's not entirely in line with a lot of the GOP, and Senator Lindsey Graham is out saying that this is a terrible idea in a series of tweets saying basically, remember what happened before World War II and all of the appeasing of Adolf Hitler. Well, this is the same sort of thing where we're seeing Russia try to take territory and be wary of repeating ourselves. What does it mean for Ron DeSantis, who is likely to be a big contender in 2024, coming out and sounding very much like Donald Trump and saying that Ukraine, not really our problem?
So I think this caused a bit of an earthquake, both in Kyiv, who certainly, the government of President Zelensky is taking a look at future U.S. resolve past 2024, but also an earthquake in European capitals. Remember, President Biden has been very successful in reinvigorating NATO. The alliance is more unified as ever, but now we have a situation in which the top two contenders in the GOP are both, in essence, using Kremlin talking points. I mean, the notion that this is just a territorial dispute literally is from the press spokesman in Moscow, and so that is really alarming. Both capitals in Europe and in Kyiv, and I think that it's good that we saw both Senator Graham and Senator Rubio as well push back. There are Republicans who are strong on the notion of helping Ukraine, but boy, I think that an earthquake happened last night, and there's going to be a lot of makeup to do by the U.S. now. If the Europeans are really going to look at us and question what happens in 2024.
That's a good question. Courtney Kube, thank you very much for your reporting. And Mark Palomaropoulos, F. Carey Stone, my friend, appreciate it. And still ahead, Kevin McCarthy reportedly held a private call with his caucus on how they should and should not respond to the bank failures, what he told his GOP colleagues to say, plus false hope, what some January 6 defendants are looking to Fox News to do for them. And Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell is out of the hospital. When is he going to be back to work, though? We are back in 60 seconds.
Hey. All right. To basically put an end to this particular video here, we have seen the atmosphere that is intensified 1,000-fold just within the past 3 years, basically since COVID has hit. It's not looking good because I still don't see a revival movement coming from that in which what God had originally ordained the windmill ministries towards being part of. B, I'm seeing the forces of nature even becoming more vicious and violent. C, instead of the Russians retaliating or relinquishing from that in which what they have started, they're actually getting even worse. I seen a thing this morning in ending, and what I'm looking at here, of how that the World Court has already started the paperwork of fumigating material in the regards towards actually putting warrants out on Russian federal offenses. And this will start at the top with their president, and it will go all the way down to their generals. And I don't know if they can prove that some of their everyday everyday soldiers, if they can identify their faces and getting their names, I'm pretty sure that there'll be warrants out for them too as well, with these mass graves and etc. as far as humanitarian war crimes against humanity. They're already in the process of starting that, which is going to do this. In one way, what they was talking about this morning, that it will alarm various people in Russia associated with their military, that various people are serious about holding these people accountable for their actions. That's true. It will. But what else will it do, psychologically speaking? It will make them feel that much more hemmed up in now what that they have started. Like I said, whenever it comes to Russian roulette, the Russians played the blue book on it. Whenever it comes to putting basically one bullet in a 6-chamber gun, and then taking the chamber and spinning it around, and then pulling the trigger to see whether or not you was unlucky or lucky. Whenever it comes to Russian roulette, we're probably going to see more of these incidences that could evolve into something even major of the drone, because they're going to know that they have made one of the worst mistakes that they've ever made in their entire lives. And until their soldiers turn on their own people for the survival of their citizenship there, it's a possibility that by putting out this paperwork will actually agitate the problem rather than delinquishing it. And I've said this all along pertaining to the Russians. First of all, this should have been settled within the first 30 days, one way or the other. And secondly, you can run a fox to his home, as the old saying goes, but you won't run him from his home. And if he feels that threatened towards making this type of mistake, he will be more prone of doing something even more crazier, such as nuclear armament. They've said all along that they have not taken that off the table. And once they identify the mistake that they've made, you think that they're going to surrender? You think that they're going to admit to their wrongs? You think that they're going to retaliate as far as backing up and basically throwing up a white flag? Kind of doubt it.
What happened at Silicon Valley Bank, there's a number of dominoes that fell, and it's not necessarily fair to say that one, event led to the other. What we have to remember is that management ultimately made a decision to have their portfolio on a long bet, essentially, that interest rates would not rise as fast as they did. It was because of that choice that ultimately they had to liquidate that portfolio when deposits started to come out from their clients. And then as a result of that, the bank run began. So it's a little hard to piece.
What about the decision to insure these deposits over $250,000? What goes into a decision like that? How much concern does there have to be about the broader economy to say we gotta cover all these folks?
It has to be considerable enough that the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the Federal Reserve, and the U.S. Treasury, in addition to a sign-off from the president, would say that the failure of those banks would equate to a systemic risk that could potentially be catastrophic to the economy. That's the reason why they use what they call SRE, the systemic risk exception, to guarantee deposits beyond $250,000 using the FDIC's fund.
So the investigation into Silicon Valley Bank, what about Signature Bank? Is that getting an investigation as well?
If it is, we haven't confirmed it, but there are two actual investigations, both a Justice Department inquiry and an SEC inquiry into SVB.
Okay, got it. And then Dodd-Frank, there's 17 Democrats who voted alongside Republicans to overturn those regulations or loosen those regulations that Donald Trump signed into law. If those were still in place, would this have been avoided?
Yeah, in a former role, I covered the passage of that bill, and not many people were paying attention at the time, but Dodd-Frank, again, as a refresher, was the post-2008 effort on Capitol Hill to expand the amount of regulatory tightropes essentially around the banking industry. Have more capital, have more liquidity to cover potential bank runs. The Trump-era administration approach to that was to pare back some of those rules, not wholesale, but to kind of reduce the stringency for banks that were in the medium size, essentially covering the likes of Silicon Valley Bank. And actually, at the time, I interviewed the Silicon Valley Bank CEO. He said, we support the relief being proposed for mid-sized banks. At the time, they were mid-sized, which will allow us to focus even more on lending and job growth. Since the passage of that bill, the bank quadrupled in size, arguably leading to what situation.
All right, the other part of this is now, what is Jerome Powell going to do at the Fed next week? Is he going to raise interest rates by a quarter of a point, a half a point, or is he not going to raise them at all? The CPI came out today. Where does that lead us? How does that fall into Jerome Powell's lap?
Yeah, so inflation clocked in at 6%, prices higher this year than compared to this time last year. That's an improvement from the 9.1% we saw in the summer last year, but guess what? Still well above the 2% that economists say is helpful. Now, prior to this weekend, one track mind for the Federal Reserve: make interest rates higher, take steam out of this economy, make inflation come down. But one of the dominoes to fall that led to SVB's collapse was higher interest rates. So you have to balance that, which is the reason why you have some Wall Street bets that are saying Fed's not going to be as aggressive on interest rate hikes next week. In fact, they might not even hike at all. We'll have to see how that
That's a tricky job he has. I do not envy him. Ken Delaney.
And that was another thing that I kept telling them about towards raising the interest rate the way that they did last year, that it was only adding insult to injury whenever it comes to people being already broke pertaining to COVID, you know, basically doing a lockdown. And then all of a sudden, these people are already late on their mortgages, they're already late on their car payments, they're already straining significantly towards being able to make ends meet, and then all of a sudden you're going to drive the interest rate up. You're going to take the average home payment from now $1,000 to possibly $1,100, almost $1,200. The same payment, you're going to rise it from $1,000 payment to about $1,100, maybe almost $1,200, and that's just on $1,000 payment. That's just on an average loan. If these people has went out here and bought a big home that was valued at like $500,000 to $750,000, well, you can double that payment or maybe even triple it. So basically what we have here is the system that is regurgitating upon to itself, and one of the primary things that helped to do that was raising the interest rates. I've already said that. I was saying that last year whenever that was occurring, just like I was saying last year, do not play with the Russians. They are not a group of people to play with. They should have been full steam ahead in addressing that problem, that if we don't watch, it's going to get worse. It's going to get bad. And there's going to be severe fatalities and death and injury, and there's going to be so many problems that it's going to relate to. I mean, whenever World War II was going on, my God, whenever the seriousness, you know, I had somebody just the other day commenting about what that the Veterans Association done up here just on the north side of Weakley County, almost into Kentucky, towards taking a accident during World War II and memorializing where the men died at during World War II. During the time that we was doing all that, I wound up down in Dyersburg, down past Dyersburg, at a military museum down there, Air Force Museum, and I got to discussing it with them, and they said, well, don't think that was the only accident that happened here in the United States. They said they pointed out about 10 or 12 different planes just right here in Northwest Tennessee that dropped out of the sky because they was basically in a rush towards not only building the planes, but in a rush towards taking common everyday people, farm men, farm boys, and giving them a week's training and telling them, hey, you got to fly this plane. We're at the point of almost dying here. in addition to the restrictions that come upon to the people at that time, restrictions on rubber, restrictions on metal, restrictions on fuel, restrictions on all the above. Is America really ready for this? Is the generation that's growing up today, can they adapt to this type of environment that our ancestors had to adapt to just to put us where we are today towards surviving and maintaining a free world? Is that what these young children are ready for? Because if they're not, we may be doomed if something major occurs. I don't like to think that. I would love to think that out of patriotism that they would be willing to go out on the front lines, the same as others has done before us. But I can't validate that because of the way that these children have been raised and the type of hatred and the type of bitterness that they have towards their own government because of various circumstances that has fallen up into their lives. Maybe they felt rejected. Maybe they was given up for adoption, whatever. Maybe they done too many drugs, or maybe their parents done too many drugs, and now they're basically heroin addicts themselves. I mean, I could go on and on and on with the generation that's growing up right now that I don't know that they're willing to adapt to a harsh situation like that, other than possibly war breaking out in our own land towards having to defend ourselves because of people basically losing their minds. It's really unsettling. It really is. It's very unsettling. And one of the things that I brought out before, and I'll bring it out again, and I am really going to quit this time on the video part, is that during World War II, whenever things got that intensely, horrifyingly bad, whenever the 2 bombs dropped over in Hiroshima that killed, I think the first bomb approximately killed about 250,000. The other one killed about that too. About 500,000 people died during that, not counting the people that got exposed to all the other elements. People in that generation, in that era, still cared about life and still cared about the successes in life. Today, in 2023, do they have that same self-esteem? If something major was to break out, do we have enough control of ourselves that we're willing to say enough is enough? Or would we have to be subjected in surrendering to whatever force that was coming up against us, regardless whether it was the force of one country or another that was bringing this hardship upon to us? Would we surrender and basically enact a brand new government, a brand new regime, which would require for the American flag to fall and hit the ground and another one to take its place? Is that what we're willing to do? Because from the looks of things, it's getting serious very, very quickly. And I don't know if it's because of the internet society. I don't know if it's because of the satellites and the media and all the above, because we get now our news instantaneously. But it's getting worse. It's intensifying, regardless whether it's the forces of nature or the forces of mankind. And we're going in the opposite direction towards peace and utopia. And I hope whoever gets a hold of this and listens to this, that they can recognize this the same as I can recognize this. Especially whenever you have the failure of 3 banks. Boom, boom, boom. All within, what, a 72-hour period? And who knows who else is out there right now that's already borderline, that just hadn't made that announcement yet. Well, we're fixing to fold too. Good luck to each and every one of us. We want to say God bless America. God bless our troops, our American troops. God bless our endeavors towards where we go from here. We want to pray for the victims of those that is tragically suffering through all these situations. regardless whether it be the forces of nature or the forces of man. We want to pray for our leaders, pray for our country, pray for people like Mitch that recently had a spill towards falling. I think he's got a cracked rib. Hopefully it didn't puncture a lung. You know, I don't like a lot of his ethics pertaining to this guy right here, towards what he stands for, McConnell. But I don't wish no harm upon to the guy. I don't wish no harm upon none of our politicians, even though the politicians before them, or maybe even some that's still in there right now, are the very ones that's got us in this hot water. I don't wish no harm upon them people, and never have, and never will, because it would not be the Christian thing to do. Even if I lived over in Russia and I was being persecuted, or in South America and I was being persecuted, they would just have to go ahead and kill me, rather than me get on the same level that they would obviously be on towards wanting me to hate them. We are supposed to hate the sin and not hate the sinner. I've said that again and again and again. And just as the Bible talks about that he has not found our works perfect yet, to go back to do our works over again. There's a reason why all this stuff is happening all at the same time. And it's only intensifying. Rather than getting better, it's getting worse. God bless. Good luck to all of us. Heaven help us all. And shalom.